Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
So, hot take: Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus are the Neoplatonic concepts that made the gods, who are actually our super soldiers from the future in Warhammer 40k. See how I tied that in there? And that eventually we're all going to become super deities unless we can escape that fate. Either you're eaten by the gods, become the gods, or better yet, you maintain your superhuman status and usurp the gods with the Titans. Thoughts?
So those who race towards death, those who wait, and those who worry. That's a Jim Morrison poem, which feels applicable somehow. What are your options? Look at your options. What do you got?
Can you become a god eater as well?
Yeah. No, that's actually... Is Jim frozen or am I?
No,
Jim's the 40k guy.
I'm just absorbing.
You're not allowed. You're the least. You're not supposed to sit still. You're supposed to be the guy who jumps around a lot. Also, if you have any tarot cards you want to pull up, you're more than welcome to open the show with that. I don't know. Did you have anything you wanted to share, divine wise?
As far as your comment, I mean, I'll pull a card. Why not? But the thought that came to mind was mainly P. Hall's comment, like we're the atoms of the gods, and the gods are the atoms of us, or whatever. It's almost like a matter of perspective. As to Plate's comment, that's more of the navigation in the toroid towards the polarity you prefer, I guess you could say. So it's your other negative is the running away kind of flight, and then the fight would be more the positive kind of thing. I don't know. Interesting. I hadn't thought about Prometheus and Epimetheus in a while. Isn't that like forethought and afterthought or something to that effect? It's like etymologically, yeah.
Totally. Epimetheus is an afterthought, or
Prometheus is the one who challenged the gods, isn't he? And so he got chucked into a pit or something, had his liver eaten out 3 times a day or something.
Tied to a rock by an eagle or whatever.
Yeah. So
to fly like an eagle.
Yeah. To explain to the people, because the thing about my internet's so bad, it's going to be embarrassing. I'm sorry. The point is that Prometheus was before the gods. I think is the important thing, is that the Titans existed before the gods, because out of chaos, there were all the pure, radical, and we call them Neoplatonic concepts, right? Like we say, before thought or afterthought, or intuition versus afterthought. There's Cronus that emerges from the Titans. And so the Titans make the gods. The gods are made. Okay? And that's why the gods aren't perfect. They're just super. And at some point, the Titans are like, wait, this is bad, because the Titans are being suppressed. The ideas and the thoughts and the pure realizations are being suppressed by the gods, which how like our world. right? Because religion is this, I mean, I hate to be all like Nietzschean immediately, but it's that religion seems to be this suppressive force that's divisive. It's trying to amputate man's spirit, to deform humanity's morality so that they treat this full potential as evil, whereas evil and good are probably a larger part of free will. And so the suppression of free will is part of this idea of the suppression of the Titans, which is the suppression of the self by the gods. And so emerges a new idea, which is that the gods don't make man, right? I mean, the gods were made themselves by the Titans. So it seems only logical then that man is this next creation by the Titans. So Prometheus forms man out of clay, breathes life into him, something that later generations have changed to say God did that, right? Elohim, the family, which again is the funny thing, the gods, we just sort of turned into an ideologue, this individual, but it's Elohim is plural. So the gods didn't make man, Prometheus does. And in conjunction with that, also with the sacrificial offering of the meat, he gives them a little layer of fat over bones, right? And then the gods choose to sacrifice the wrong one. They realize they were tricked. The god realizes he's eating bones and he's pissed. So then he decides to have Prometheus, tied up so that he can have his liver and his intestines chewed out by birds every day for all of eternity. Yeah.
Dude, I went to go see Hamilton the other night with my friend Babs, and
Props.
on the way back, we were listening to Thomas Paine, and parts of what you were saying were almost verbatim what he was speaking to, like specifically regards to Jupiter and
That's great.
And the fate of the Titans. And as I was listening to it, I was just like, for conspiracy theorists that have their feelings on the sinking of the Titanic, I think just straight out the gate that they would name it the Titanic in the first place is pretty sus. You know what I mean? Like if you're looking for something to be a great ongoing success into the future, Spruce Goose, much better title. By the way, isn't it funny that Leonardo DiCaprio was in the 2-cassette tape movie about the world's biggest plane with the Spruce Goose as Howard Hughes, and he's also in the 2-tape movie about the world's biggest boat, the Titanic. But anyway,
yeah.
yeah. But it's about the hubris of man. So you're getting that's like a lot of those old mythological stories speak to that. That man in his arrogance does these things, but the gods are always beyond. It's very rare that a human being is able to really trick a god and succeed. You know what I mean? Like it's like, good luck with that.
Yeah, and their punishments were reserved for people who found out their trickery because they hated that. I mean, that's why they wear beards. The beards are symbolic of them hiding behind something.
Interesting.
Because I mean, they are obviously sexless. They're goddesses combined, so there's no reason for them to show a beard. Also, beard is a cover, isn't it?
Dude, I remember Krishnamurti one time talking about like the authority of people. He's like, I don't care how long the man's beard is. That does not make him the authority on the matter. Like, because people will look to the guru of like, oh, his beard is so long. Surely, Merlin, come on.
Yeah.
Or Jim Morrison in his later days. As far as the Titans go, is the idea being something to the effect that they're a primordial archetype that fractures, like differentiates, and that these later iterations are just, I mean, is it a battle of versions? Is that what it's getting at?
I used to think of the Titans as being like tectonic plates, these huge plates that cover the earth. They're more like that, so more like a vast elemental forces, and then the gods are the first derivation from that, sort of like
psychological layering.
The sort of primal consciousness from that, because like Zeus is more conscious than Kronos, because Zeus is conscious enough to run away, although he's like got a really scary childhood, wherever he's that sort of like abusive father escaped from. He's got that background, and so he becomes like heroic when he rebels against him. So he becomes, but obviously later on he becomes a tyrant because he's so powerful compared to everything else that hasn't had that sort of background.
Right. Yeah, there's
Excellent.
all the
the
commentaries change to determine, like, so when you're looking at biblical texts, like you're talking about the Elohim and stuff. It's like there's so many different commentaries and so many different takes and all of this exploration of what all these things mean. When you're looking at mythology, like we're discussing, well, what happened in the story? It's not like the Torah or the Tanakh where you can you literally here's the text, this is what it is, because there's so many different versions and there's so many different takes over time too. Even with the Egyptian mythology and stuff, it's like every dynasty has this different version and development of how they're treating these archetypes. So it's not as simple as
the gods, particularly the Greek ones, had all their foibles and complications, and they were sort of like very rich human beings in a way, like the wealthy elite nowadays. That's pretty much the way to read them. Like a hero will be jealous of Zeus's lover, so she'd kill, I don't know, half the women on the planet or something like that. Just so he wouldn't get his way with women, and that sort of thing. And all that sort of rivalry, and it's like mirrored in old dynasties and ruling families and all that sort of thing. So with the Greeks particularly, there's a lot of projection going on.
Was that Andreas?
Yeah, I say mythology based on historic noble families seems completely believable, but there's also something that seems really, even if that's the case, uniting about the religions then, or all of these philosophies, Hinduism, Mayan astrology and mythology, and even that if you get to prototypical Greek mythology, that Uranus or Aranos was the sky god, right? Which is kind of an Indo-Aryan Vedic idea too, to have the sky god, and that the sky god's a primordial deity that is split originally. I mean, there's even an original splitting between the father and the mother, so the sky and the earth, right? Gaia. So Uranus and Gaia come together again. So it starts from chaos, splitting into a yin yang, the father and the mother, and then from Uranus and Gaia comes the Titans, and then from the Titans then come the gods, and this kind of like John saying,
it's like a psychological
this ascension of
well, it's more like
right into like what is
parts.
possible for realization, because the gods can
more into more sort of the mundane levels of reality. From the primal reality, whatever, which is above human comprehension, into something that's more comprehensible.
The monad.
Because the gods in the past, they needed to have human attributes so that people would relate to them, so they could be worshipped. So there's sort of like, I think it's dichotomy between that. There's godliness, they're sort of untouchable, but there's also, they have passions and addictions and failings. Like they would fail to think things through, or they would not see something that they wanted to see. They'd have human weaknesses. That was just to make them more relatable in a way.
What's written at the highest point of Athens? Know thyself.
Oracle of Delphi stuff.
Isn't it argued that that it's believed that this was relatively common knowledge in Greece, that all of these gods and goddesses were aspects of the psyche, also in Egypt as well, that the mystery schools that people would move through was that these are aspects of oneself, that's kind of like a shell around your deeper ultimate self.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So that's particularly true about the Titans. So when the Titans are created, their Titans are like Styx, right? Or six parents are Oceanus and Tethys, right? So you create the underworld, but the underworld is a manifestation of natural forces, like rivers are Tethys and oceans are Oceanus. So these aspects of nature that we think of as the elemental environmental forces that we are made up of and we are defined and obligated by, those are the Titans. And then humans are suffering in enduring the Titans, while the gods are suppressing the Titans. And so this becomes sort of a goal for humans to be more like the gods, to be able to conquer nature, right? The Titans being nature, which is also why they end up being so erased. At a certain point, they're just looked at as evil. But this is something that's also weird, that we're saying that demons, and I mean, when people say angels and demons, it gets really weird to me, because you're talking about daimon or jinn or genius, right? The inspiration that's inside you, or eudaimonia, like utopia, eudaimon, right? A perfect demon, a perfect genius. So there's mad brilliance, right? Insanity brilliance. But then there's also this sort of ordered rhetoric that humans are able to accomplish. So we are capable of answering the problems the gods cannot answer themselves, right?
Yeah. The riddles they set were things they couldn't solve themselves sometimes.
Did you guys see the Megaopolis?
I wanted to.
Francis Ford Coppola's newest movie that he apparently wrote in like the early 80s, but it just recently came to fruition. So I liked a lot of aspects of it. It was interesting, but it also kind of reminded me of that show that came out recently called Chaos, which speaks to this idea of the rulers as gods, you know. But it takes all these stories from, you know, both mythology and like historically, like of the different rulers, and then things will play out in this film, but it's like related through, you know, some kind of like futuristic kind of, I don't know, projection. But I felt that these two things were really relatable, especially you were speaking to it earlier, kind of like the gods as, you know, the real leaders. It's almost like they're like the Illuminati or something. I don't know. You didn't use those words, but it's like that kind of idea.
Got the inspiration from. Yeah.
But something that fascinates me in regards to the deities is this like in Greek tragedy, when they would speak to like the job of the actor is to basically invoke within themselves these archetypes that relate to the gods, and that's why you'll see in the Greek tragedies, like the obvious one being Oedipus, that like what plays out is very similar to what happens with Kronos and Zeus, right? Or Jupiter and Saturn, where, you know, you kill the father story, and then it's like, but that's something that would apply to people's own lives in both allegorical and maybe even literal ways, depending on historically what we're pointing at, you know. Like even like the killing of Julius Caesar, like when you look at like Shakespeare's version of it and everything, it's just very like loaded with what feels like kind of like the deity symbolism, like encoded into it or whatever, you know. So yeah,
he was trying to deify himself, wasn't he? I think in the William Shakespeare play, when it's implied that he's trying to make himself a god. And so
yeah,
they were acting like the demons that dragging him down to earth, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was jumping all over the place, but you know the Doors song "Not to Touch the Earth, Not to See the Sun." Those are two chapters side by side in the Golden Bough, and it speaks to like the nature of a ruler being treated as a deity, or wanting to be treated as a deity, and then that has its perks and it has its negatives. So in that song, he's speaking to the ancient world, but then by speaking to the Golden Bough, but then he's applying it to today when he says dead president's corpse in the driver's car, the engine runs on glue and tar, come along, not going very far, to the east to meet the Tsar. Tsar is Caesar. It's the same root, right? Yeah. We also had the Tsar bomb, which is kind of crazy. I believe that was the biggest nuclear bomb we ever detonated in the world, was called the Tsar bomb, named same root. But anyway, I'm all over the place.
We love it, David. Don't.
No, I mean, so also just on the like, just to clarify on the story of the human, you know, power of self. The two Titan brothers we were talking about earlier, Prometheus and Epimetheus, right? They're responsible for giving positive traits to every animal, and when it comes time to give a positive trait to humans, because Epimetheus lacked foresight, there was nothing left to give.
Bag's
so Prometheus goes to Mount Olympus and he steals fire from Athena and Hephaestus, right? So
through a
because
tube,
of that,
right?
that's why. Yeah, right. So that's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of interesting because that's the opposite of the Jewish, Christian, Muslim, the Abrahamic tradition. The Abrahamic tradition is sort of that Lucifer tempts this sort of Lucifer tempts man into losing his divinity, right? Which is kind of a weird story anyway, because it's like you're
Right, but
just a pet of God then.
Yes and no, because if you're treating that story, you're speaking to the interim of the fall, which is not eternal. So that's like the difference between like the Judeo-Christian treatment of it versus like actually like scholarly analyzing like what is this text actually speaking to? Because he says if you eat of this, you'll become as gods. Was he lying? It depends. How long is that going to take? You know what I mean? And what are we? Like they're relating to themselves as they're this particular form in time and space, allowed a few short-lived pleasures followed by death and ultimate annihilation once they eat of that fruit. So like, is that, it speaks to the unity. So I think that's where the idea of Christ comes in, is that you eat of the flesh, we're all one. Like that's the recognition, right? Especially it gets tricky because we're talking about like the organized religion and with all the rituals and the whole treatment of it. And then you have the implications of the thing in itself, right? So I mean that's the idea, is that you have the fall and you have the redemption. It's pictured in the coin of the original dollar, right? I believe we've discussed this, where you have Jesus on the cross on one side and the serpent on the pole on the others, and it'd say NU 21 on the cross for when in Numbers 21 when Moses puts the serpent on the pole, which people argue is where we get the symbol for money, as the line with the S, it's like a serpent on the pole. But the idea being that the fall and the redemption are two sides of the same thing. And actually the gematria of, what is it, Nechesh? It's been a while, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but the serpent in Hebrew is the same gematria as Mashiach. So the Messiah and the serpent have the same value, which is 358, which are also Fibonacci numbers, interestingly enough. But yeah, so they amount to the same, so to speak. Yeah.
I love.
So well, that's interesting. Then is it true?
1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Just going for my Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah.
Well, but if
one's
that's
13.
If that's the case, then Prometheus is more like Lucifer. The Prometheus is more like Satan than we even were saying a second ago. Because if that's the case, then he's not lying. Or better is that Satan is actually more like Prometheus, right?
Well,
like Prometheus is helping man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Prometheus is a Satan archetype. Yeah.
In a weird way, like if you look, I mean, from the Christian perspective or whatever, it's like you're gonna become aware at a new fundamental level of the knowledge of yin and yang, the polarities or whatever. So you fall into consciousness at a new level. Whereas it seems if Prometheus is stealing the fire from the gods, that's what is the fire of the gods? Maybe their capacity to create, destroy, or whatever, which is also a yin yang in its own right, but kind of imbued a little differently. But yeah. Prometheus, I mean, whenever I haven't talked to people about this in a while, but it's like the positive spin of the Lucifer thing is he's trying to open our eyes to a reality that exists that we haven't initiated into, and this is how you do it, or whatever. Whereas Prometheus was kind of like you were saying, Andreas, he's like, well, I gave all the fucking magic tricks away, and now I've got to go snag one from a different order of things.
Yeah, it's so easy to conflate Sisyphus with Prometheus because like symbolically they share a lot of commonality, like
eternal recurrence
and also just punishment, eternal punishment, sacrifice, but the idea that I don't know if there's much talk of like imagine Prometheus happy.
We talked about that earlier. Yeah, Sisyphus
right.
Smile. Oh yeah.
Right. So that was before the call you guys were discussing.
Yeah.
Are you
Prometheus is really just an organ donor, and he's really stoked on it.
That's because that's the next thing. Because if fire, I mean, they're saying fire is property of the gods. Well, humans are property of the gods. Maybe then the Titans are considered, once the gods have conquered them and put them under, maybe the gods consider the Titans their property. What is fire? Fire is a primordial element. Fire should be a Titan. Maybe it's Helios. Maybe it's something to do with the rescuing of one of the primordial elements that's been abused by the gods. Again, these are not the all murder and like this is the Zeusian archetype. It's not the friendly god. It's much more like the Old Testament. The gods that are angry, jealous, wrathful, vengeful, lying, cheating, stealing.
Right, but also there's the issue of vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And then almost every story, one could make the argument, if we're talking Old Testament God. First of all, it says he in English. It's you, like you were saying with Elohim. If you're talking about Tetragrammaton, it's hey. But no, there's two heys actually. But no, I mean, if you're talking Tetragrammaton, it's the argument could be made that we're actually speaking to the elements. So people would say that the four aspects, like Tetragrammaton, literally means four-letter name, right? But
doesn't it
the
make
idea,
a little Adam Cadmon if you put it up weirdly?
too, all of these things, like you could go on with the meaning of Tetragrammaton for a long time, but it could be argued that we're talking about a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter in that order, that is expressed Kabbalistically as the different components that make up the tree, which is spoken to in the Sefer Yetzirah of how things come into form. And then you could also argue that like all of these stories could just as easily be those are the elements. So you're like, oh, the God is a wrathful God. Well, if you see a natural disaster and then you're here writing down a story to relate this to, your offspring of like whatever it was that they have no other record of knowing beyond your story, which is also a song and loaded with mathematics and all these bits of knowledge. Like I don't know. I resonate with that idea that when you go through the text and you see places where it's spoken to in different wording, are we always talking about the same thing? Like Blavatsky would point out, like Lucifer and Satan, like, are we talking about the same entity or the same archetype or whatever you want to call it? Like, are these all the same thing? And when it reoccurs or is spoken to in the story, like, Satan is related with sin of missing the mark. It's, it's an adversary, literally, whereas Lucifer is nothing of the sort necessarily. Like, is it really
it's
an
perfection
adversary
gone wrong or whatever?
Right. So it's really easy to just conflate these terms and these ideas sometimes, and at the same time, like, I don't even know, like, when we're speaking to God, if we're always speaking to the same thing in terms of like what we'd say Kabbalistically as Ein Sof or Ein Sof, or like, is that are we speaking to the same thing as when we're talking about Tetragrammaton, which relates to the elements and the physical world? Like, you're talking about the Titans as elementals. Like, I'm over here thinking about, like, I was really, when Noah first came out, Darren Aronofsky's Noah, I was like, what is he doing? He's
these
just
Gollum
like
things.
Yeah, but I mean, these are ancient texts that speak to these components. Like he added things that weren't in the Torah, or I should say Bereshit, but like he went ahead and like took all these other concepts, which to me feel like when you're describing the Titans, that's where my mind goes, is like what are called the Watchers, like the elementals, and like the idea of like ancient people perceiving nature in an entirely different way as a living thing. Like all of it, even the rocks, is just more dense, but it's still alive, perceptually, like people could, and then what is that fire? Is that fire insight? Are we talking about the same thing? Like, I've transcribed Kabbalistic text that relates to the tree of knowledge as like literally grain, so that had gone bad and that people didn't prepare the grain properly and it messed with their
like ergot style.
This is what when we were transcribing it with my rabbi, he looked at me and he goes, I know what you're thinking. And I was like, well, you know what I'm thinking because you're thinking the same thing. So whatever. Yeah. Because it's describing a green line that enshrouds the planet, that stretches out from this one point where we have the first introduction of something that changes our consciousness in a fundamental way. And then when what that sets into motion isn't the end, that's not the end of it. It's like now the fall goes through time, and as we move through, things get tighter and tighter until they describe it like, that the nature of consciousness is such that it wants to be free, just like everything in nature has this propensity, and that the more blockages that we create around it, the tighter it gets, and the more we experience everything is like collapsing around us and in like the breakdown of duality, basically. So like we have like this like collective breakdown, but then out of that, like the thing that's essential, what they call the shefa, gets like released in this explosive way. So like even ignorance has this unexpected value that we could never comprehend from the place of ignorance, you know, because we can't see what this will mean in the long run, you know. So which could be viewed as a rationalization, and I'm sure plenty of occultists do that, you know, where they're just like, oh well, doesn't matter what you do because in the end, you know, it's all good, you know.
Well, so then the Titans are free.
Go ahead though.
No, wait. I want to hear what you said, Jim.
I don't know how. I mean, I hear how you would say that's a rationalization, but it seems that we're trying. You know, Jung is always like, we're in the soup that's cooking itself. It's like it's very hard to talk about the thing that you're a part of. There's no objective point. There's no sterile point where we can just be like, this is what it is on the exterior, and we're separate from it. That's why all these cultures are hitting the same nail from different angles of approach, because they're experiencing elemental reality, and they're like, this seems profound and reasonably like fundamental. So how does this come around, and what are the dynamics between these things?
It's the difference between doing what you want and doing what thou wilt, could be argued. So like if you're treating it that, oh, whatever mistake is made, it's not really a mistake, so fuck all, right? So but like you don't, it depends on what your intentions are, where you're coming from, you know, or maybe your intentions are all road to hell, you know. I don't know. It depends, you know. Doesn't that term come from Cerberus? That's the three heads of Cerberus supposedly represent like sensation, good intentions, and what's the other one? Pleasure or something? No, what is it? I can't remember. But there's one of the heads of Cerberus is supposed to be good intentions, which is supposedly where we get the term "the road to hell is paved by good intentions." I don't know, but yeah.
Well, so that's another aspect of realization of phenomenological diversity. So if the gods are organizing chaos, aka enslaving the Titans and forcing them into order. In chaos, the Titans were free, but maybe more impotent. And now, even though they're enslaved and they're forced to drive on the same side of the road, now they have the mobility of this interconnected universe, this highway system that makes it possible for more to be done. Does that make sense? Do you think?
Yeah, complexification has its fruit. It seems like this is the fruit of complexity. I mean, this, you know, at the very, McKenna was always talking about, it's like, you know, there's more going on right now than for like 1 billion years at the beginning of whatever, this cosmological thing. And in a sense, the more the mandala adds, I don't even know where my train of thought just went. Totally Gemini moment. But you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's always the same song and dance, but it's like, there's more participants in the musical chairs or whatever.
Well, yeah, I used to think of the Big Bang Theory. I thought that was a way of explaining, like, as things as time goes on, there's more different ways to experience reality. Because, you know, as things expand, you know, they get more complicated and they separate from each other. So they go on their own way and so they're home for their own adventure, sort of thing. And so they become more differentiated from themselves and each other. But yeah, from
it's
the
like
closest ones,
right? It's like a
or a fractal pattern, because as you go further away from the starting point, you know, like in the Mandelbrot, if you go really far into that, it doesn't look anything like it did at the beginning. There's no way you could say that's a Mandelbrot, you know, like on 18 billionth iteration on it.
The difficulty with the Mandelbrot allegory is that, or whatever you want to call it, is that you're describing a fractal, which was, I believe, Mandelbrot set was like the first computer-generated fractal, right? I could be wrong about that, but it's at least the most well-known, right? But the idea is that when you go into the Mandelbrot, you're going to find the hole in every part, right? Like you go into this part, and you find the hole, and it just keeps repeating like that. But what we have in nature is the same principal dynamic, except every time you go in, although the principal dynamics are consistent, it's also infinite variety and infinite complexity that just keeps going and going. And you'd ask, how many ways can you arrange 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, you know? And then you're like, you know, and then it's
even
like
what conditions, polar or tropical, or
it's like at this point, like even with what's happening with AI, when do we get to the place where we can generate a fractal like we literally see in nature with infinite variety like that, you know?
The new Google chip might help.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds
But the thing is, the Mandelbrot is only based on one seed. So that's that seed point. That's what determines, the apparent difference in it, but it's also the underlying sameness. So if you have fractal pattern, if you have multiple seeds with a seed pattern that defines how they interact, then you get, three different seeds there. So you probably have an infinite variety. But yeah, if you could keep adding to that.
You know what came to mind when you said that?
I gotta say, it would be imprudent
Sick.
not to be grateful to Let's Bring It. Just the fact that he sent 5 super memberships. Anybody wants a membership? I was already like, that's pretty cool. But I was gonna let you guys talk because you're doing important stuff.
Link me.
But then he did
I didn't know
10.
there's memberships.
So that's freaking 15 new memberships. So that's really cool. Let's Bring It. And I hope everyone gets. I hope anyone watching the show, if you don't have a membership, that's your chance. Jump on there and check out the deleted content. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to say.
No, that's fine. It's fine. I was thinking that by explaining that metaphor, you could just say if every sentient being in the universe, let's say, has their own seed, to their own fractal startings point, their own fractal pattern. That's why, artists, you can tell who the artist is if you recognize their style.
Mm-hmm.
Unless 99% of the cases, you can generally do that.
There was some guy, and I think it's like the Maroof Foundation or the Maroof Project or something. I'm sure Clayton knows about this.
And Tennant.
But you know how he was basically taking like the shape of a shadow and it's like, here's the Hebrew letter. I'm gonna really botch this, but it's like it could be Islamic, it can be Greek. It's to your point, John. It seems that like the Mandelbrot seed would be like the letter E. How many ways can we freak out on letter E? But it's like you can do other seedings in a sense, and maybe there's only so many options. I don't know. That gets into like the grammar of reality and the Hebrew alphabet or whatever. But the
Mandelbrot pattern is relatively simple, I think, as far as fractal patterns go, because fractal patterns, they can sort of depend on different seedings to make up the overall pattern.
I think there's a Julia set or something. There's another less known one. Yeah. So there's a couple options. It's not just like
there's loads. Yeah, once you understand the maths behind it, you can just
fiddle.
Yeah, make your own easily.
Right. It's just, I repeat this, but it's one of my pet peeves is the conflation of biology and technology. So when people see do a treatment of a fractal, and I think it's both things are valid. It's just to take this to be that gets a little weird because you're like, yes, if anyone wanted to question the fractal nature of reality, people come out of people. Like that's sure. Like
it's the copy paste process.
But the profundity of that infinite variety is just can't be like it's so inconceivable, whereas like I can conceive a fractal like as we know fractals because it's a replication of this basic idea, but it points to something,
What were you saying your pet peeve is? Biology being conflated with...
The conflation of biology with technology. Like
Elaborate on that?
Living in California, like I talk to a lot of Silicon Valley people, and sometimes I've talked with Andreas about this a lot, where they'll just jump the gun, where they'll be describing a biological issue, and they'll be using technological terminology without skipping a beat, as though there's just no distinction anymore, or very little distinction, and it annoys me. Because I felt like that was like in 2020 and 2021 or what, the way people would describe virology was with a lot of technological terminology as though we were discussing a computer virus, and the nature of biological systems is so complex in its own completely distinct way that and I think that there's something to be said for the two orders of the Sephiroth, Kabbalistically, how that translates to that, because there's the order that's the organic order, that's like the emanation itself. Yeah, exactly. The Shefa and the creation itself, the way that things come into form. And then there's the sustaining order of the empire, which is, if you've seen that movie Pi, that's what they're pointing to with the 216 thing, because that's the gematria of Gavora. So you have this kind of substitute intellectual projection that we will treat as though it was one with the creation itself. Although it's distinct, it's not separate, but at the same time, it means that recognition of how it's distinct is essential to, if you're getting into occultism, you don't take the sustaining order of the empire to be the same as the actual organism itself. You know what I mean? Like, we're replicating that order in all of our systems, sure, but that's where you get a duality projected on top of a polarity. Like, polarity exists in nature, duality does not. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I mean, you said a whole lot there. I gotta metacognate on it.
Yeah, the intellect replicates what exists in nature. So we look at
from the
dynamic
imagination.
From the imagination, yeah. And so although we can approximate it, it's not the thing in itself.
But I don't know.
Wasn't the manly pee hole thing?
That's the issue. So it's more, I think that.
Go ahead, Andreas.
No, if you can remember, that's fine. I was going to say that the the symbolic logic we use totally affects our perspective of a thing and probably the thing itself, because we're interacting with the thing. And because things might not exist, we're getting down to what Neoplatonic concepts are, right? Because that's that idea of the primordial titans being realized as fully accomplishable or fully self-realized beings. And I think that's what you would call a god, right? A god's like a fully self-realized being that has complete potential to accomplish their goals and dreams, whereas maybe the dreams themselves, right? That's like because we're talking about the two Sephirot, right? And you can think of how would you say that? Absolute? How would you pronounce that word?
Absolute, yeah.
David.
Absolute, you're close.
Absolute is often seen as the highest or most abstract level of reality, closest to the divine source, often equated with the pure potential of the universe. I think this is kind of the Titanology or Titan Mecha that we're referring to. And if you look at everything through that, you might miss out on the Beria, the world of creation, which is, I think that's maybe the tech. Would you compare that to techne? Like in Greek, techne is from craft, right? So you could say that this is the crafting together of those concepts in that primordial structure. So, I mean, that's also why I think it makes sense to do it, even though it's wrong. I get why it bothers you, but that it's okay in a sense. The only problem is it will lead biology to a technological world.
Right. Well, it relates kind of to what I was saying earlier about the fall, and that relates to like transmutation, or what we could call like the alchemical process. So even though you're like in this interim where we want to distinguish, but at the same time, ultimately, this is distinct but not separate from that. So like this itself will be like, you spoke to it a second ago. You said it yourself, like that one transforms the other. So like it does influence the other way back around. But it's just like you're describing the two of the four worlds in in Kabbalistically, those are emanations. Like one emanates from the other, emanates into the other. Like Jim is really into tarot. Like it's argued that the four suits of the tarot, one emanates from the other, going from etheric to gross, so into gross physical matter. But at the same time, you know, the nature of intellect to replicate, if you're treating that replication as though it were the thing in itself, and you're going to act on that, that's really dysfunctional. And we do that all the time. So like that's and that's my peeve. Like, and that's what I see everywhere in people's communication, social media, all over the place, is where we have one set of terminology that has its right application in this manufacturing realm of the things that we're building. Like we build technology, but then we're treating it that this is the same thing as something that's more mysterious. Like
you've seen the videos of like RNA replication and stuff, where it's like little machines doing things. I mean, it's mechanical all the way down. It seems
right.
Like,
the intelligence.
That's because but it seems that way because we're looking at it that way, and I'm a big fan of looking at it that way. But even though I'd love to do it, I feel like we're making it that way.
I mean, we wouldn't know those things without the technology to perceive them, if that makes sense. So in order to get to that level of awareness, the technology has to be in place.
That's kind of the point. But that's a recent feedback loop. So you have to imagine that technology and science. No, I don't necessarily know that. I know that 300 years ago or so, which is not a lot of time in the scan. Like, there's a lot of time going on. That before that, we didn't use this empirical measurement system to decide that things were mechanical, and we didn't understand it. Who knows? It might have been, but it might not have been the same thing. It's like that. Okay, so the fact that you could take Chinese medicine, for example. People know that these things work. Like my dad would give me Siberian ginseng and just be like, yeah, ancient Chinese secret, but not necessarily understand. Even today, they don't completely know why it works. It's just a cool herb.
Faith,
However,
belief,
as we start to have that's a big part of it, I think. And the more you have belief in your techna, you're like, look, I know how DNA works because I know how quantum computers work, because I've worked with them, and here I have an example that I can use to make a parable. And if I can do that, then that becomes true. I think that's more logical than to say we've discovered some secret of the universe. It's that we made the universe conform to our perspective.
In astrology, I kind of think of that because at some point we didn't know about the outer planets, right? And when we discovered Uranus, ironically, we were talking about Uranus earlier. It was, what is Uranus? Is this higher octave of Mercury, which is like Mercury is this little angel kind of telling you things, whatever, information systems, smoke signals, whatever. But like Uranus is like opening the Ark of the Covenant and the faces melt. It's like epiphany, at the highest level, like information at the highest degree. And when we found Uranus in the collective of humankind at that point, Uranus basically is about technology and revolution, evolution, punctuation events. And what was going on in the zeitgeist was essentially the scientific revolution, American French revolutions. Like, it's almost like when we become aware of something, it crystallizes into the experience that we're having because of the definitions of the beliefs that we're apprehending. I know I'm saying a whole lot of word soup there, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that would be cool.
All right, I got two, but the first one is I demand that you pull out a card because I really want to see that. And the other one is
I want David's interpretation.
Well, or Prometheus. Yeah, go with David.
So we're gonna
first.
pull something from the liver of Prometheus here. We got the Three of Cups, of course.
Thanks, girl.
It's a celebration, bitches.
Oh my God.
These guys, it's fun. Cups are all about emotions or whatever, and this is like it's party. Drink up, whatever. Hallucinating mysteries. It's like Burning Man. It's like, let's all have fun and be creative and free emotionally and orgiastic creation, kind of that jazz. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing here.
Well, how does the Three of Cups represent to the argument? Because I see the Three of Cups as also the Titans, God, and man connected in that respect as well, and what we're talking about. But before I get into the Golden Throne and the fall of the Emperor, which is what I want to take it to, David, how would you respond? And also John after that. Don't let me just rant.
I'm gonna jump out for a second and I'm gonna run back. I have something to grab that will be helpful for this.
He's got to relieve his Three of Cups.
I'll allow it.
It's funny,
John.
I'll say this, and John can talk. The Three of Cups is funny because basically with the yin yang, it's not two things. Like you have the monad, the one, and then that differentiates it, and you have a polarity, like he was talking about, is natural. Yeah. But to even be able to witness that necessitates a Trinitarian perspective. Like the line of the yin yang is not either or. It's this. You see what I mean? So anyway, John, the consciousness.
Yeah, it's Milosevic versus Tito.
Meet or something. I was thinking, free cups is like free drinks.
Yeah,
free drinks.
It's a bar crub Paul.
Free drinks for all. Yeah,
it's a blasty blast.
Yeah, probably plastic cups.
On a stack.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about fractals. Yeah, I mean fractals just determine the outward shape of things like leaves and stuff like that. I don't think anybody thinks there's anything more to them than that. It's just that computers have made them easier to plot, to calculate. That you had the science for it is quite basic. It's stuff like if you have a base 10 range, 0 to 9, and you have the number 7, and you keep on adding 7 to itself within that base 10 area, you get someone like 7, 4, 1, 8, and so on. Do you follow me? Because
barely. I'm not math.
10. Okay, yeah. So, but that number sequence sounds apparently random, but it's just basically you started with a maximum from 0 to 9, and you start from 7, and you've added 7 to it.
I guess
it sounds random if you don't know the pattern, the way it was built.
Right. So there's a a reasonability to the design. The design is
and it's quite the math's quite simple. Once if you put it on paper, if you write it out on paper, you find it quite simple. It's not much different to getting the number value for every letter in the alphabet.
But that seems like not self-evident. But it's like if you're going to have reality that's expanding or whatever, it can't be. It's complexifying, but it has to have certain rudimentary principles that are very transferable across the board to any domain, or else it couldn't manifest.
Well, that's it. I mean, fractal patterns exist in nature, like like I was saying, I think rivers and lakes and tributary patterns, the shape of leaves. But yeah, it's just the outward appearance of them. It's not that it doesn't capture the spirit of them or anything like that. Any more than.
But that is kind of the point. Well, but there you go, exactly, because like pi is a perfect example, or anything actually, a straight line or a curve is a perfect example of a Neoplatonic, we could say, but a primordial Titanic concept. This idea that these are the building blocks of reality, and from there we get our order. But that's still symbolic logic, and so symbolic logic is dependent. Maybe it is Neoplatonic. We can't necessarily understand if the Titans are the number one or love and justice, these concepts, these primordial concepts that don't exist in nature, but are self-realized because they are the abstract median of our experiences, where we're like, okay, well, all these rulers are basically close to a straight line.
You remember that scene in Prometheus when they're landing on the planet, the film Prometheus from Ridley Scott, when they're landing on the planet and they go, there are no straight lines in nature, so they can tell something's been built on the planet. Yeah. Seems applicable.
Yeah.
Are there no straight lines?
Absolutely.
Because I feel like there's hexagonal patterns at the fucking Irish Giant's Causeway. It's like those are some straight lines, right?
No.
Right.
And
I think
crystalline
it's
lattices.
Right.
No, there's always interference.
But even that, I think.
Yeah.
But most people would, I don't know, most people, but weirdos from Santa Cruz who raised me would tell me that crystals have some consciousness to them, and that's a big reason why crystal lattices are the way they are, and why they're sacred geometric shapes, right? Particularly interesting are the Star of David, or, you would see the Seal of Solomon in crystalline lattice is pretty impressive. So it makes sense that consciousness is tied to realization through material reality.
right. So what
David is like this the Uranus and Rhea thing going on. I mean, it's just yin yang in their culture without really talking about it. I think it's fire and water technically to them, but
But even if you zoom in on that Seal of Solomon down to a molecular level, it wouldn't be straight lines. That's what they're getting at. With no straight lines in nature, it'd be wibbly wobbly because of interference patterns.
Correct.
Right. As
Correct.
Alan Watts
on a
would
fun
say,
flow.
they're wiggly lines. and how much of a wiggle is a wiggle?
Oh my God, John! Did you ever watch The Wiggles? I don't want to bring up that show. I'm sorry.
No,
The Wiggles are
too
fun.
late.
But wait, David, do you have that Kabbalah? Yeah, show us your Kabbalah deck. What's this all about?
So this is an incredible deck because these cards, they'll literally just, instead of showing you like what you'd see in a normal tarot deck, it just shows you literally how it translates into the Kabbalistic tree. So here you're looking at the Three of Cups, and then you can see it's Mercury in Cancer, right? So it shows you the symbol for Cancer and the symbol for Mercury. It corresponds to the world of Bria, as you were describing earlier. It has it as Gimel because it's 3, and that's the third letter. I don't know, yeah, there's 4 different parts to each Sephiroth and how they apply in terms of the small cards. But it's a fun deck. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this.
it's like a
No.
deconstruction of the art. It gets under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah, it's actually really fun because it's like they're like flashcards. So if you're like, if I was giving a reading using the Thoth deck, it's really convenient because I would see immediately that I'd see the symbol for Cancer and I'd see the symbol for Mercury, and I would know, oh, okay, you're looking at Mercury and Cancer. But no, I don't know. It's just it's helpful in terms of how the energies distribute through the Kabbalistic tree. But the idea is that we were talking about the fall so much, and it's like the idea is that early people, it was just there was nothing. The energy wasn't dammed up, So like if you can imagine like a world with like no rules, like we need no neuroses, you know, we just don't have hangups. And then all of a sudden we introduce something that creates that conflict. Like it could be that, you know, developmentally, in order to evolve, we have to know on a deep primordial level, like what doesn't work, like how we're not evolved. And that is the argument for like what all of our folly like contributes to deepening that understanding on like on, you know, such a primordial level that assists in our own development. In other words, like I repeat this a lot, but you develop eyes out of a primordial desire to see. You develop ears out of a primordial desire to hear. It's spoken to in the Upanishads when it's like not that which the eyes see, but that by which the eyes can see. Know that alone to be Brahma, the eternal, and not what people hear adore. Not that which the ears hear, but that by which the ears can hear. So it's like, what is, you know, I feel like, this is weird to say, but I feel like Wilhelm Reich kind of spoke to this and like the function of orgasm, because it's like, you're like, well, what is the ultimate function beyond reproduction? Like, what is this for, you know? And so I think that there's something to be said for that. It's connected to creation. Like we are co-creators, like people come out of people come out of people. And so there's like a functionality to all of our senses that we kind of misperceive a lot of the time because we're just treating everything in terms of avoiding pain and reaching towards pleasure, when really like the whole like the yoga process and all those austerities are directed for not just transcending that for peace of mind, but it's actually a developmental thing for humanity, you know. And what one human being can do, everyone will ultimately do in the long run, if we are in fact ultimately one organism, you know. But yeah.
Word.
If the sort of like the higher up ones raise up the lower ones, I think most people would be happy just living in muck.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, David, about the eyes desiring to see, so they emanate out from this desire from the internal experience of the, I guess, creature, and then they kind of pass down the genes. I almost see it as the McKenna teleological, like, you know, single point at the end of time, whatever, the transcendental object, where it's it's drawing these things towards an end, in a sense. And like that's, I mean, I don't know how y'all think about. It's like, does Mr. Potato Head really want to have eyes? So he's like, I'm gonna make it so, and then like the eyes develop, like from the internal to the external, or is it like, how would it know? You see what I'm saying? Like, how would it know?
Right. When you say no, so that's it. So when you say it's a tree of knowledge, right? And what is knowledge? And it's there's like, you know, there's knowledge as accumulation, where you accumulate knowledge and it builds upon itself. And then there's what Plato would speak to when he would say that all knowledge is ultimately innate. So like you never really learn anything. The thing is just dividing itself the same way that cells divide in order to expand in space. What does that sound?
Clickety clack.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're just trying to correct my mistake. I did the base 10 iterations of 7 wrong. I just did it off the top of my head. So.
We're going to stick you on a rock with an eagle.
I know. I'm going to get my liver pecked out, I'm sure.
Well, so, I mean, if anyone wants, I'd like to, you know, and Jim, I feel like, because you've been pretty into Warhammer, but John, I know that you're familiar with it as well. I mean, I like Warhammer. I've made that point a few times, and I think that it might be more real. I mean, I'm crazy, right? So I think it could be something literally happening right now outside of time in our future. I think it's probably leading into our reality.
We don't even have to go that far. One of the precepts of the universe is that the chaos there's an Empyrean, which is like this subconscious parallel reality that basically is a feedback loop of emotions of humans. So there's this like, you know, the god of rage, the god of deceit, the god of entropy and stuff. And the more we become aware of them, we play with these gods, these ideas, and it feeds them, and then they become more evident in our realities. Right, so at some point you get blood for the blood god, and corn, and all this stuff. It's like all rage and all death and violence is this vibration that emanates and creates the conditions on the other side, and then that slaps back into our reality or whatever. Anyway, Warhammer's so big, I don't even know how to fucking talk about it.
Really?
It's
well, I mean, interesting that Titan, like again, we talked about fire being Hyperion, and if I go to the Empyrean Wikipedia and I type in read in other languages in German, then Empyrean spelled with an H. And so all of a sudden it's like him period. I feel like there's something to that also, that it's the empire or the fire or something about, again, that humanity has like the potential of the gods, and that struggle again because the emperor ends up kind of you could almost compare him to a fallen angel or a fallen god, because he becomes sort of death in the golden throne, right? And so maybe the golden throne relates to that. But John, sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah, I was just sort of randomness. I was just thinking, isn't Mars mentioned in WH40K? Isn't that like the last space before Earth that they reach that horror?
Oh, they have a shit ton. I mean, Mars is the home of the Mechanicum, which is like they're robot worshipping people who think the God Emperor is
Mechanicum.
Yeah, exactly.
Adeptus, yeah.
So they're like, oh my gosh.
I was thinking it's quite interesting to do with Musk. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. One of his kids has a Adeptus name, I think, or something weird. So he probably reads that shit or has known about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, because Warhammer, the old Warhammer fantasy role playing, that's sort of an adaptation of the old world, which is planet Earth in history. You can map locations onto Europe, onto modern Europe from there. I think Vienna's in there or something. The old empire is Austria. It's just where it's centered in. Yeah, I mean, I studied it a bit like growing up. I got a white dwarf and I used to color in the
also
the pictures.
Austria is Österreich, right? Österreich, right? So it's the East Tar Empire,
Kingdom,
right? So it's the Tartarian, it's the Eastern Tartarian Empire Kingdom. So I feel like there's something to that as well, that this is this outside of time reality, and like you're saying, the subconscious space-time world that exists. I mean, Ingo Swann, I'm pulling up now, his remote viewing for the CIA for 1984 about Mars exploration, where he talks about it's pretty good. A civilization outside of time, essentially, that are living underground on Mars 250 million years ago, but they're from our near future, right? And so this seems very in line with what Warhammer 40K, I mean, if it's not based on it, it somehow ships in the night to that concept.
I'm a little confused. I thought that I remember when I was in 1999, I remember my cousin in Sweden was really into Warhammer, and he had this giant like diorama setup thing of all the pieces across in like this big table in his space, and he painted him and all this stuff.
Yeah, it's like a tabletop game.
I didn't realize that it was that it's a role playing game also. Like I have friends that do D&D, and I watch. Oh, I misunderstood then.
No, they just happen to beef up. They got some authors to beef the fuck. I mean, at some point it was like chess with fucking whatever GI Joes, and they were like, let's sell this shit. And then they got like Spielberg level writers to like beef up the universe to the point where there's more archetypal individuation for me personally reading the Horus Heresy than anything else I've ever come across, and I fuck around with a lot of cool shit. So I'm not all like, hey, yay, space fascism. I'm like, every archetype and every color, like Pink Floyd, any color you like, it's there in this universe. It's such a play. It's a sandbox, basically, to play.
There is a role-playing game with it as well, though. Warhammer Fantasy role-playing.
Possibly.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah, you're probably not into that because it's seems totally different. But what I'm saying is like that is set sort of like in the olden days, and then Warhammer 40,000 is same universe, whatever, in the future.
Further ahead, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And this has been, I mean, the whole Tolkien thing with Middle Earth and stuff. I mean, there seems to be levels of our awareness, whether it's elementals or whatever, where we think there's more of the picture than meets the eye, and we tell these stories, but the stories seem to have nuggets of truth that really ratify our own reality to the point where we sharpen ourselves. Like wisdom comes from these things. Like we are not just telling stories. It's not just tic tac toe. It's like there's real shit going towards like
Middle Earth is based on Earth as well. It's like the Earth here. I was thinking J.R. Tolkien, when he was talking about the orcs, I think he said he based them on the Mongols.
A band of orcs.
The orc race in general, where they're raised by wizards, and then they're bred with other races to make more nasty races, like the orcs be bred with elves by wizards. Yeah.
It's funny because in 40K the orcs are fungus basically, because there was this war in heaven well before humans ever existed. And I don't need to get into this, but basically the elves and the orcs were basically bio warfare, like engendered by these old gods or whatever to duke it out, and they created these entities, these races.
The Slan, the ancient ones of the Warhammer universe.
What if Spielberg written that's to this level? I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't think of somebody who's. I
mean, Spielberg wrote Kamala's campaign. You know that?
No.
You can look that up. Yeah, there's a whole thing. So, like, they literally hired Spielberg to like write the like to push what they were doing. Like he was on board, like busy. Like,
that explains why she wore that weird brown Nazi outfit. Actually, I get it now. It's definitely Spielberg, a Spielberg move.
I should have said Spielberg. I should have said.
It wasn't exactly makes sense.
Spielberg was the hidden hand of that.
Dressed like the villain from Indiana Jones. Okay, but I don't know how deep you've gotten, Jim. It sounds like Jim's super deep in it. I just thought, like, I keep trying to push about the God Emperor in his sort of deathly. He's kind of in the golden throne, unalive. And this whole thing with the Horus heresy.
Immortal, right? The God Emperor or whatever is this immortal being who's a human. He's lived through all these epochs. At some point, he basically comes on the scene and is like, I don't even know. It's like rally around the family, pocket full of shells. He basically like takes this disbanded, because this thing called Old Night, where the warp bleeds through and fucks everything up. Like all these kind of like the nightmares of your subconscious become real and actualized in this plane, and that like kind of separated. I mean, humans went out to space and did crazy shit for a few thousand years, and then this kind of apocalypse occurred and cut everybody off. I feel almost like Plate, where it's like, how do you talk about Kabbalah? It's like, oh my God, where does one begin? It's just too big of a nut to crack. So I'll shut up. But yes, the stuff's like deep and crazy. And now he's basically on a throne. I can't even talk about it, right? But
he's psychic as well. That's what people know.
Yeah, they're feeding 1,000 suckers a day to keep him alive. But basically, he's an eternal. So if he died, he could be reborn, but like they don't know that, so they're basically keeping up this meat puppet. That has powers, I guess you could say.
Yeah, his mind is protecting the whole planet, isn't it, from the demonic incursions of warps.
Right,
and Horus is from that area, and he's trying to take over whatever the God Emperor's job. But he's all warped himself, he's perverted, and he's everything that they don't want on Earth. He's everything the Imperium is against.
Yeah, Horus and the other Primarchs, there's like 18, 20, but 2 sets of them have disappeared and aren't talked about, just to make the lore interesting. Or I think in a sense they were like, you can create your own story with the game, go play. Like this is a lot of dynamics of games,
of course, you have campaign
stuff.
And
so it's like the Book of Mormon. I mean the musical Book of Mormon, like kind of
maybe a little bit of both, though, because I feel like the idea that when you because I mean,
in the Christian,
there's definitely some Prometheanism in Book of Mormon, and at least the King Folly discourse. And so the idea of you create the lore, you constrict the reality, you play God, if you will, and then you say, hey, now you can play as man in the world that I've created, right? Then what happens is you're tying people in, and this is something that's been around for several decades now. So you're tying this in, perhaps generationally, into the ancestral lineage of families of the human race, so that at some point in the far-flung future, when any of this stuff is plausible, that it actually impacts reality. And since we're getting so close to the singularity, which I believe is
imminent,
this very soon and inevitable imminent point very soon from now, that already it's crazy today that if I want to like go outside, I can just make 30 brand new songs on my phone before as I'm walking, just name with AI, like I want a song about the street I'm on, take me to Albert Platz. I'll make a song about it, right? That's crazy close to being able to realize any dream. The next step is to say, I want a pink pig that has wings. I can just boop, boop, boop. And then I want to be immortal, or I want to be underneath the future and the past of Mars. I want to stop the continuity of time and create new timelines. This is what happens in a singularity. That's essentially the world that is required for Warhammer 40K to happen. And the extra ingredient of people understanding that paradigm to work within, right? So the home game is essential for the give and take and participatory experience of not just the individual or the gamer, but humanity itself in the evolutionary step towards where we go. And it sounds like what we've talked about already is not a new idea. So you're saying, oh man,
No.
Warhammer 40K, what a crazy thing, blah, blah, blah.
Greek
But
gods,
realistically, I mean, it just... I saw a Disney movie about it once, you know?
Yeah,
Are you guys
nothing under the sun and all that.
John and Jim? Whoa, James and John. Whoa, the two disciples
Sons of
who wanted to be
thunder.
at the right and left hand of Jesus. I've been talking about this recently. Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah. Are you guys hip to the production of the Book of Mormon from Trey Parker and Matt Stone?
I've heard of it.
Mormons like
Yeah,
it. I had a couple Mormons show up to my house. I kept them here for a few hours, talking to them with my friend Amelia. And
Good job.
but they can acknowledge this idea that, so the premise is that, like, super long story short, but this guy is like, he's not a good Mormon, quote unquote, right? So but he's doing work in the third world, trying to get people to embrace Mormonism, but it's really difficult because they got serious problems in their lives that they're really struggling with, like it's really crazy. And so why should they incorporate it? So he ends up basically, him and this other guy end up taking Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and combining them with what they know of the Book of Mormon and create their own thing out of it. And then later on, their superiors are exposed to that and they're not down and they basically get excommunicated, but then they go on to form their own religion based on what it was that they were enthusiastic about. And the reason why Mormons more than not seem to really like this is because they have no equivocation about what their own religion is. They are totally fine. Like, there's nothing offensive in that, because they're like, this is, not, but maybe to some degree is choose your own adventure. What makes sense to you. And so if this works, if it's cohesive and it follows and you can glean something from it, then what the fuck does it matter? Like, it's like our age-old treatment of religion is like, and this is like I told you, I was just listening to with Babs about with Thomas Paine talking about what's wrong with organized religion. That's kind of the issue. Is he's like, look, if you were saying that it was poetry and you didn't just call these people, there's like prophets. How were they prophets? Like, where is the prophecy? He was like, I see a lot of poetry, and that's fine on its own terms. But when you extend it into this means this, that, and the other, like, I can probably pinpoint one real prophecy in the entire Bible, the Old Testament Bible, and that's Book of Isaiah. Like, I did an actual prophecy from the way people generally relate to what prophecy means, and maybe in the New Testament Book of Revelation, which is so encoded with riddle and all of this stuff.
Well,
like,
if you take these stories to be true, it's like the cock will crow 3 times when you'll deny me. I mean,
right, but it's like, yeah, I mean, but that's a prophecy that's answered in its own book. You're talking about a prophecy that relates to me and my life, and how does this affect me? And that's the point of what they're describing in the Book of Mormon. And the production is like, these people who are really dealing with things in their own lives, like, what is this going to do for me? It's not going to do anything. Like, and if it doesn't do anything for you, then what's the freaking point? And so they're like, you know what? If Lord of the Rings helps it make more sense, then cool. Which is why the reason why I'm on this, going off on this with you guys, is like, you're over here talking about Warhammer, and it's like, you know what? If you can make this articulate something for you, then cool. Like, what is it? Yeah.
But here's the truth: like Aesop's fables. Do we really think there was a tortoise and a hare running a race once? It's like, in a sense, it doesn't fucking dogmatically literally matter. It's telling us something very important at another level.
Right. Although every time they recreate that race, the freaking tortoise wins. I mean, I see
because
rabbits just sit still. They don't care.
The tortoises fall asleep.
but I think that's again symbolic logic, right? Where you manifest something from the symbols you're using. But there are Mormons, they do like their book, and there's some reasons for it. It's like, it has some things that are pretty impressive, and it looks at prophecies from the Old Testament. It's one of the things I like also. The kind of the proto-messianic Genesis 3:15, where it talks about the seed of the woman is going to be responsible for stepping on the head of the serpent, right?
Sure.
I mean, and there's more for sure, but yeah, I think there's a few pretty decent ones in the Old Testament that haven't fully come to fruition per se, or maybe they do at some point in like the time of Christ, but realistically, there's so much work that's outside of time that it seems like we're responsible still to manifest and not, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing about these prophecies. They're like, hey, someone's going to have to pick up the bill and make this happen, right?
Dude. Well, I never thought of this before. It seems so obvious. I want a copy of the Old Testament, New Testament canon with all the books of Dune, including the ones the kids did, all like as one book. You know what I'm saying? Like, that would be pretty sick. Just put
you got a new project, David.
yeah. That published, just like all together. Matter of fact. Anyway.
Well, Jim Henson said it, you know, in Rainbow Connection or whatever. He's like, somebody said something, someone believed it. Look where this is getting us. There's a difference between like cultural collective truth. There's things that other monkeys can know that you can't grok because you don't have that experience of that reality tunnel. So there's a benefit, I guess you could say, from being like, well, Larry lost a leg to a tiger, so let's use spears. Okay, our lot has increased. You know, like there's wisdom garnered from not personal experience. And then Mark Twain said something to the effect of like, you can only learn something by holding a cat by its tail, that like you can learn no other way. So it seems like it's a both and, it's not either or. It's like there's collective exterior validators that will inform you, and then there's personal gnosis, kind of like what you were saying, the know thyself core, the core frequency, however you want to put this, that it doesn't matter what other people are doing. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, hey, I've experienced the Force this way, so my trip is going to be very particular to me. I don't have to like feign archetypes that are externalized. Like God damn, I'm rambling a lot lately. But
no, you're not. Actually, that's just so applicable.
You're just following the higher powers, whatever.
Well, it's both and. It's not either or. It's like the whole exterior is a reflection of all these other Mandelbrotting, and then we can glean moments of them to inform our Mandelbrot tour. And for the record, I think I've said this before on other podcasts, but one of the best things to do on Acid is to like do a Mandelbrot tour. You will just sit there and go, oh, I see the script of the Matrix. This is what we're in. This is it. The Tao is howling. Anyway, I was gonna say I'm a Christian. I don't know, bro. Like I met Christ in the astral once, and not on DMT. So like
that's good. Yeah. So cool. I don't know if this is like this is comment on my show, praying that you will accept Jesus Christ into your heart and be born again. Which I was kind of like, I mean, does this person watch my show? I thought they watched my show. Do they know that I was raised Christian, born again, been baptized more often than I've showered? Does it matter?
I just don't know how to say that.
What does that mean? It just seems like it felt like pretentious. It was a little of, I wasn't quite offended. I was just confused by it.
It's exactly where they're at, so don't worry too much. In a Jordan Peterson sense,
so I posted back. Yeah. I said, "So be born again as many times as it takes to get you back to Christ." Isn't that the right thing to say, or am I missing something? What do you think?
Oh my God, this is a whole can of worms. I mean, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. You know that little Mexican rapper guy. So I don't know, what is that even implying? To be born again, like you got to be born of the Spirit. What is the Spirit? Is it the fire of the gods? Or do you have to be? Does your burning bush have to be reignited in every plank second? Sure. Like doing that is how you walk the path or something. It gets tricky when you talk to, because I grew up religious and I can even talk the talk or whatever. But it's like there's a spectrum of literalism versus metaphor. And it's like somewhere in there, and it's not all one shoe size fits all. It's like the Tower of Babel. What is that? What does that mean? Nephilim. What does that mean? Did this donkey really speak English, or not English, Hebrew, I guess, or Aramaic? It doesn't even have a fucking capacity biologically to do that. In the Garden of Eden, was there death? Like were white blood cells not attacking? It just gets tricky. It's like, yeah. But people's intentions. I guess my point, if there was one, is like I hope that they're not if they're trying to throw you a life raft because they think you're drowning, that's admirable. But there's like, you know, I think Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel, preach the gospel, preach the gospel. And if you have to, use words. So it's like, do the emanating of the thing that you believe in, and that will be much more of a transmutative force than, like, the Holy Spirit will work through that a lot more effectively probably than banging people over the head with Sadducee, Pharisaic kind of legalism. Anyway.
I did ayahuasca with a group of like 8 people once, and afterwards we talked about our experience, and every single person in the group, though we didn't exchange a word through the entire night, all had the same experience of being completely fixated on the Eden story. So like, and including people in the group who were not raised religious, who had really no frame of reference much for the particulars around the Eden story, but throughout their experience, they were all obsessing on it as a way of like articulating like whatever, you know, like
the archetype was bubbling up enough.
Every aspect of it, the serpent and the tree and the fall and the whole thing. And it was just like, no one exchanged a word, and everyone was just attuned to that. Is it happenstance that the tabernacle was made of acacia? Like, I don't know. Like, is it, you know what I mean? Like, and that acacia is included in
random coincidence. I swear.
The temple incense, because that incense is, you know, basically hotboxing the temple with so much smoke. Like the whole description of it, how they describe it, and there's all these ingredients, including what we would, you know, derive dimethyltryptamine from way back when, from the Asian acacia plant. So I don't know.
Something that trips me out about the Old Testament is, I guess, Jacob. I couldn't tell you the patriarch, but one of the dudes Jacob's ladder. It's like he like laid down on a little rock and he had this dream. He sees all these angels. They called that place pineal, like pineal gland. I mean, like the dream just shouts. If you don't,
it's
if you
in
get
the
out
name.
Of enough,
you wrestle with angels.
Yeah.
James means Jacob means wrestles with God. So
you
it's
know,
like, I'm always wrestling with.
I feel like one of these days, though, it's gonna happen for sure. Like there's gonna be a religious war between all of the Abrahamic religions, and they're gonna all turn and see us and start throwing rocks at me. I can just tell that's coming. Like all together, it'll be every religion that fought.
Don't manifest
the Armageddon.
Well, that's okay. I'm gonna be a Warhammer god muscle soldier. I'll probably be all right with. I'll absorb the rocks into my Marvel comic gauntlet suit. But okay, the other thought is Nietzsche and Christianity. No, you're first.
Let me just rip this out because people are like 40K. What the fuck?
Yeah, go as hard as you want.
40K is a satire. It's showing just like the mythology was like, oh my god, Zeus is such a fucking womanizer, or whatever. It's like.
It was the style at the time.
Sure, but I mean, when people take 40K too seriously at a level, it's like, guys,
there's no one saying
this is every archetype going like ratchet full blast. Like, this isn't so much like the truth; it's the mystery. Does that make sense? It's like, sure. It's just telling you what to do. It's telling you how it manifests in its iterations or whatever. Anyway, what about Nietzsche and God? Where are we going? Did Andreas just dip? It's like, I gotta pee.
He might be having technical issues. I don't know. He's in Germany.
Probably
at a hostel or something, just hoping that they have good internet. But was he mentioning Nietzsche a second ago?
He said he was going to jump into that, and as a 40K fan, like, I read the books. I haven't played the game yet and all this shit. People, the beef people have with it is looking at it at face value, kind of like thinking America equals cowboy, or China equals Mongol horde, or whatever. You see what I mean? It's like if you come at it simple, you're not going to get anything. But if you come at it with like openness and nuance and stuff, you will walk away with every fiction. I mean, they just draw on everything. I can't even explain it. It's the philosopher's stone of fucking fiction for me. It's so dope. Anyway, Andreas, Nietzsche and God.
Well, wait, hold on. So you were saying 40K is satire, right? Sorry, my internet got a little bad. But the idea that it's satire is also to say it's a warning. But a prophecy is satire and a warning in a sense as well, I think, because it's saying, look, this is sort of the meta capacity of these. It's like South Park. If you put these things together, this is what will happen at its most extreme conclusion. And people like to put those things together. Some people love making a prophecy happen, even though the prophecies are often kind of dark. They're not always like super happy
Oedipus style
thoughts.
It's a tragedy. Right? And then South Park can be a comedy. Like they're both trying.
Well, comedy is just a tragedy. Comedy is just a tragedy in disguise, right? There's not really much difference.
That's a Nietzsche point, actually. I don't know what's
Ah.
but yeah. And also, his first book is The Birth of Tragedy, which speaks to this idea that tragedy isn't what it appears. There's layers. But no, just to speak to the prophecy issue is like I have it transcribed somewhere with a really good explanation and commentary from the 16th century on the Zohar, where Ramak was emphasizing the distinction between a prophecy and a prediction. And so, like, and it depends on who you talk to with any of this stuff, right? Like, what is a prophecy? But like, for a lot of people, they amount to the same, like to predict something or to prophecy something. Whereas, like, the explanation that was given from Ramak was that a prophecy is literally like a profoundly direct insight into the mechanism that exists in nature, so that if there's cycles or there's patterns in nature, one can extrapolate what the ultimate end of this will be. Whereas like a prediction is literally like kind of like a guess that might be an educated guess, right, but it's intellectual. So you've accumulated all this data, and now you're going to assert, I predict based on this data what's going to happen, which is like very left brain, whereas the prophecy is more right brain in terms of like closer to what the source of that twist. You know, like how your brain, how your entity comes into form, your organism comes into form right to left and keeps twisting in that way. So like the right is actually the basis for the left. This is actually a heavy duty emphasized point in Kabbalah, is that the two columns of the Kabbalistic tree communicate your hemispheres in the higher part of the terrestrial, which would be Gavor and Chesed. And so actually, like you were mentioning Obi-Wan Kenobi earlier, like that whole thing in A New Hope, where when Obi-Wan, he's got the blue lightsaber and he's saying to Darth Vader, who's more machine now than man, with the red lightsaber, and he says, strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you could ever imagine. He knows that, just like Hesed knows that there's nothing that could be a threat from the intellect that could, like, your right brain is the foundation of the left. And even though the right brain isn't the source, that the source is Keter, which is beyond that, it still has the understanding that it transcends, it's above the intellect. So the intellect is replicating back and reflecting back to itself. It's why you say Yakin and Boaz. It's established on one side, and then the other side is in strength, which actually points back at the right by being, where were you established? Oh, I was established over there. You know, so
the imagination begets the form, and the form speaks to the imagination, but is not of it at that level.
Sure. Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. And so, yeah. And what is this, like, when you say imagination, like you pulled the Three of Cups, like that speaks to, we would simplify and just say emotion, but these are sheaths of expression in the emanation of form. So you'd say that, the intellect is above, the emotion, but at the same time, this emotion is what gives life to what is projected through the intellect. So it has no real substance if it was left to its own. It needs this other element, just like the waters distributed from Bina throughout the lower worlds. They need that energy. They need that life in order to have any, animation. Like, they don't exist without it. So, and it's a judgment thing. It's one of those weird things. It's like Crowley would say, love is the law, love under will, and then people generally assume that that's implying that love being below the will is lesser than, when really, if you're looking at a pyramid, the power actually exists in the foundation more than it does at what's relying on that foundation above it. So that's one of the paradoxes of, like, the Illuminati, where you say this small amount of people are controlling this great number of people, is that the great number of people are actually all, how they have the power. But we treat it that it's the other way around until everything reaches a breaking point, and then we all are like, oh, duh. Yeah.
You've been beating that drum since 2016. I appreciate that. I mean, I remember during the Hillary thing, you were talking about her age and the whole, like, hemispherics and stuff. You're reminding me. I mean,
I got to read that book again. Good. It Takes a Village. I love that book. When I was a kid, I did. It's a joke, but it's true. Is the saddest, funniest part.
What's the book about?
It Takes a Village. Yeah, it's like a very metaphysical, political, social. I can't. I'm sure she didn't write it. I don't know, but it was a great book. Okay, but Nietzsche, Nietzsche, and I guess that's like the division of how socioeconomically effective you are, or whether you are more left leaning. Because if you call him Nietzsche, Guevara, but Nietzsche talked about Christ as liberator, which is kind of funny because you wouldn't. I think he had to do it, maybe, because he's trying to justify that he hates Paul, and I kind of hate Paul. I'll be honest. If you're telling me to be a born again Christian, you're really telling me to be a Pauline Catholic wannabe, and I was raised Jesuit Catholic. I've done that. I've done that, Jazz. But the idea that Christ as a liberator is cool. It's interesting. I don't know if I'm sure that Christ is on the Promethean wave. If he is, that's very Mormon. That's very, very cool.
You dropped the Promethean flame.
Talking, huh?
You got him. The ancient.
Oh, I think you're back.
They don't like it when I talk about this stuff. This might bother some people, I guess. I don't know. The idea that Christianity is Satanism. I've been saying this for years. Like, I love Jesus. I love Christ. But I think that his religion is that big of a deal. I don't know. It seems like only now I get in trouble. Christ was talking about ending all of the satanic practices that were going on. I don't know what you call satanic practices. Maybe that's the wrong term. Christ was trying to
Corruption.
liberate in a lot of ways. People
They really don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
Right. No, I'd like to speak to that. No, it's just if you look at Nietzsche's book, The Antichrist, from my recollection, it's been a while, but the way I remember it is he was kind of emphasizing this idea that like organized religion itself could be argued to be the Antichrist.
Oh, clearly.
Because in so many ways, it goes against the gospel teaching itself, and so
that was his whole trip with the Pharisees. It's like, you guys have the law down pat, but the spirit is gone. Like the emanating, like the fire is not in the fucking fireplace, but you guys have a great fireplace.
Right. He wasn't into like people projecting concepts and taking them to be these conceptual truths to be these high authorities, Jesus is as liberator. Nietzsche respected the person of Jesus in some ways because he believed Jesus in his own way sought to liberate people from the oppression of established norms. His radical message was one of personal empowerment and transformation through love and compassion. Yeah, there you have it. Yeah.
There's a good documentary. I'm not going to say everybody should watch it. I've been vegan for a while, so it's not going to sway me. But Christspiracy, the guys who did Cowspiracy, which I've not seen, and some other one, basically get into like, this gets tricky, but Jesus was more or less like, he was a trouble to the Jews for a while, and the Romans were kind of like not trying to have sectarian violence, so that's why it became a political issue to them. But basically, when he went into Jerusalem, into the temple, and flipped the tables and released all the animals, the translation, it really actually is, den of thieves, and not robbers, but murderers, because he was trying to liberate the animals.
Yeah, I like it. I hate to be like that into it, but it resonates. There's something there. I've heard a lot of, over the years, over my lifetime, a lot about, Seventh-day Adventists and St. Thomas in India and the connections. I've talked to a lot of Vedic Christians that believe this as well. It seems pretty reasonable the more you look at it, even from the Mormon perspective, that even though a lot of Mormons don't go this far, they're still a very Pauline religion a lot of the time. They don't have to be, but a lot of them are. That atonement is through the blood sacrifice, whereas Christ is saying, dude, stop that. Because after Noah gets off the boat, there's clean slate. That's the whole freaking point. And then Noah does this sacrifice, and God's like, dude, what are you doing? And now you've started it all over again.
Should have got for that, really.
Yeah, that's why Moses gets all pissed off before he goes back up Sinai to give them rules when before whatever he had wasn't rules,
Wasn't that the whole thing with Cain and the curse of Cain and the kingdom of Cain? Is that the problem was that he did a blood sacrifice to his god, and so the Cain is like not well respected, and is it's a curse, your cursed kingdom, and then you're saying no, it is exactly the same thing. So it's repeating the folly of Cain.
Right. Well, it's all opposed to scapegoatism. and or at least the looking to scapegoatism to provide what people like, the idea that your sin is personal. Like your sin affects everybody else, and other people's sin affects you. Just in terms of missing the mark being sin. So like, if one person misses the mark, it's going to affect everybody. And so we are a community. We're all affect each other. And so this idea that you could save yourself and just remove yourself, it's like there's something very like
the thing,
yeah. So in a sense, you know, like Nietzsche's thing is almost like bodhisattva, because he's like, it's real Christianity in a sense, because you're like, it's the recognition, like I was saying earlier, that we're one. But that's the point of the flesh, and that's the point of the wine being the blood. You know, it's like the Eucharist, and what we've done with the Eucharist and the way we've made this ritual out of it. It becomes this level of absurdity that you know, as an aversion to something, you ritualize it. It would be the equivalent of like if I went to a doctor and he wrote me a prescription for a medication that I do actually really need to be okay, and I took that prescription and I put it on an altar and I lit candles around it, and I had like a picture of my doctor, and like people come to my space and I'm like, this is my doctor's so amazing, look, he wrote this with his own handwriting, this is, you know, and I never fill the prescription. You know, that's like the equivalent. It's like that's what we
knowing
do.
the path and walking the path.
Right. Like, oh, my doctor, he's the best. You guys, I have to tell everybody. I'm going to go around, I'm going to preach it on the streets about how great my doctor is, and I'm going to die in the streets, you know, because I never freaking fulfilled.
Better or worse, people tend to shout about what they're excited about, whether it's war or money or God.
Well, I mean, okay, so again with Nietzsche, because the whole point of him saying that is that Christianity, and I've always thought this as well, Christianity was way cooler when it was on the outs, right? Like, I think the same with Mormonism and anything, really. Like, Mormons are super cool when they're not in Utah. Mormons hate Utah Mormons. You know what I mean? Out of Mordor, they think they're kind of weird there, right? Because once you're the secular power, everything changes. If you're like, I mean, Christians living in sewers with gypsies, obviously they're going to be cool. I don't know how else to put that. They're just more fun. But then once you're like, because you're trying to say, hey, you know, we have to like focus on the love and the compassion and the defense for keeping us safe from an oppressive regime. This is probably true with Islam or anything else as well. Like the Jews in Babylon, I'm sure were very nice people. And this Christianity, once it becomes the state religion, I mean, it's pretty dangerous because not only is it subject to the same power corruption meta that people are worried about, but the ideology of Christianity is to war against any sin, to amputate and deform humanity away from its free will of power by destroying sin. And what is not a sin to Christianity, right? To a Christian, everything essentially is a sin unless you're doing just one specific, there's like one road that you lead down, right? So Christianity as enslaving, in contrast, Christianity in Nietzsche's view, enslaving people by teaching them to renounce their desires, suppress their passions, embrace self-denial in favor of an otherworldly reward. Christianity's emphasis on obedience to divine commandments and its focus on sin and guilt were for Nietzsche mechanisms of control that kept individuals from fully embracing their potential as free, powerful beings.
Ooh,
it's like
Martin Luther, he had his revelation on the can, right? And so like people have gone over the psychoanalytic significance
he
of
released
that, because the point being is, like you were saying, like for as far as Christianity is concerned, every natural function becomes sinful. And so you'll see a lot of like older text around Christianity. Anytime that they're describing hell, it'll often have the same attributes, and the terminology is the same that you'd treat in terms of your bowels. So like it's like the
Hieronymus Bosch world.
Yeah, and it's crazy because like psychoanalytically, like it speaks to the nature of anality and like this place of like
Saturn, man,
you know. Yeah, but it's at the same time you're like the natural functions are what are regarded as sinful, whereas some of the most, what I would consider the largest things that could be missing the mark have nothing to do with natural functions. They're completely unnatural. So like a lot of corruption is not the same as like something that you're like, oh well, this is like sex can be the most scandalous thing there is, when really technically like sex is about as natural as you can get, other than like pissing or shitting. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
it's just to be human. And so they set it up, the church did, that it was like, oh, so now we're treating it that what is the most human becomes the most sinful, and what is the most inhumane can be rationalized because of, oh, well, this is just the way things are. Like, to me, like a lot, I see this in both Old and New Testament, and even within the Old Testament, they'll speak to it, the phenomenon where it's like, for example, this temple will not be built with human hands. Why? Not because you shouldn't, but because you can't, because it's not that kind of temple. So like, if you, then what do people do? They look for a loophole. So they're like, we'll take material from an outside land and bring it in to build the thing. All these loopholes to get around the thing. So there's a rule set up that's not really a rule. It's more of like, it's not a rule like a stop sign. It's a rule like gravity. So like something's being acknowledged that it's like, you can't actually do this, but they're like, we watch us, like we'll figure out a way. And like, you'll see this like all throughout religion. Like, to me, I look at the gospel stands alone. It's one thing, it's what it is. And then a lot of the New Testament, from what I gather, and beyond the New Testament, the papacy and the whole treatment of this stuff is like workarounds. Like, they're like, how do we work around this? Well,
they were
he
trying
did
to
say
apply
that,
it.
but what did Jesus really mean? You know, Bill Hicks used to like to say that. Like, I think what Jesus was really saying, and you're like, okay, whoa. You know,
Yeah, the epistles are like emails we found. It's correspondence of like how to work these ideals out, because they're ideals. They're not even really necessarily doable.
Yeah, I got a question about the Bibles. Okay, is there any mention of the church as being like a beneficial place for Christians to be in? Because I know there's a passage where Jesus says, "I am in the house of my Father." You know,
there's a couple things. There's a couple things there. First, before we do that, I wanted to do this because I was with Martin Hipp, my friend, through Raphael and Europa here. We went to Festung Königstein, in a star fort that's built on a silicon tree stump in the middle of Germany, in Saxony. And he was saying, oh, you know, the story of Cain and Abel. Kein Übel means no evil or nothing bad. And a big thing with the German and Yiddish translations and the understanding of the rabbinical text, that there's all these other versions of Cain and Abel, which are saying something to the effect of nothing destroyed evil, or that evil manifested, this idea of evil and nothingness that they're named after, which is interesting also to Mormonism, because in the King Follett Discourse, the final treatise or dictation of Joseph Smith, he says that the German Bible he's been reading is the most accurate translation that he's seen, and it's completely different from the Erasmus and the Erasmus inspired King James translation, which most people base their beliefs on, right? So I think there's something to that. The other thing is the word church, right? As you asked John. And church does not mean a temple. You're a temple. So a church is wherever two or more are gathered in my name, or in the name of God, or for the word. That, for instance, right now, we're creating a shared lens where I'm seeing something, you're seeing something, he's seeing something. We're all kind of metaphysically beyond, outside, hyperphysically outside of the object, studying the phenomenon, right? And by that study of the phenomenon, that is church, right? And it's even manifested how much benefit is that for a Christian? What do you mean by a Christian? But maybe Christianity can mean to delay the progress of evil, you know, to an extent. And so if we're doing that, we can even use metrics to judge how big is our shared lens. And it's pretty big because we're all over the freaking world right now. Not a single one. I mean, I guess you guys are on the same continent, but at least on the other sides of it. And, you know, it's crazy to think about how much more we're able to see through this idea of shared lens. So church does elevate the position of the horizontal communication, right? Because in the beginning and in the end, there will be only the word.
Yeah.
It's a network, basically.
Yeah,
Church is like
but not necessarily the church as a building. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Exactly. The church as a building is a hospital, right? Because you go to the building and then they play these harmonic resonance frequencies and you feel better, right? And also it's like an AA group has that chart where you can find out about boat races. It's a place where you can get together to plan what you're going to do the rest of your life, the other times of the day.
Yeah. Is that the meaning of why it's Captain Kirk? Because it's like he's got like the Starship Enterprise was essentially like like you're on a mission, and so it's like it
In
becomes
the words,
to get
in the words of the 15-year-olds of today, church, bruh, church. Right? Have you heard that yet? That's what the kids say now. Church.
the hip thing. I need to get on that. Yeah, I'm always behind on this new slang.
I believe that means absolutely. So yeah, church. But so yeah, I think Captain Kirk, of course, that's the representative. But there's also the nuance there that it's a new kind of church, and it's a kind of, maybe you could say, and that's interesting, a Promethean church. I was going to say a satanic church because of Anton LaVey, obviously, as Spock. But I mean,
right. Thank you. Oh snap! I wasn't saying because Kirk means church in Scottish, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
Kirk means church in most Scandinavian languages.
Well. Oh, what's that? Sorry.
Pike. Yeah, you have.
Yeah, he took over from Pike. Yeah, Albert Pike.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you have Christ. You have Christ Pike. Christ Pike is the first captain, Christopher Pike, right? Which is like it's like Albert Pike, and then he's in a very Warhammer 40K kind of way, trapped in a golden throne, right? You know, like he ends up in this crazy. You know, have you seen it? Do you remember? Is there any picture, any buttons of this?
Was that in the pilot?
Yeah, it's in the cage. Here, you can see a picture of it. So he ends up in this weird kind of horrific accident where the simulacrum parasites have taken over the very early prototypical Darth Vader, perhaps. Because, I don't know, it's important that you see the cage. I think if you don't know this episode of Star Trek, it's probably one of the most important episodes of Star Trek.
That was the most platonic thing you've ever said. It's important that you see the cage.
I believe it is. I mean, it's if you like Star Trek or not.
Yeah. I love Trek.
Because, it starts out where Babylon 5 is better. Babylon 5 is better. Deep Space Nine is my favorite.
Yes.
Deep Space Nine is my favorite.
Because it even gets into fucking prophecies and all weird shit there.
I love Babylon 5.
But I mean, the idea of Pike being trapped in this chair, and that his reality is an illusion, and eventually the goal of Spock is to take Pike back to this world where he's had his whole life destroyed and his body's been turned inside out.
Are you saying it's the Wizard of Oz in space?
It's more demented than that. What happens is the spaceships crash, and these aliens put them back together as best they can, but they don't understand human anatomy. So it's like the girl is this horrifying, deformed, like inside out, like thing, but they're also able to give her the feelings of everything being fine. So she lives in this illusion where everything is well, right? It was kind of prototypical Matrix stuff. And Pike gets, it's a key episode. And Pike gets, and the whole time they're trying to arrest Spock because Spock is doing this thing that is against all the protocols of the Federation. But what he's doing is he's trying to get Pike back to this simulacrum planet of the parasites where he can be forever living in that illusion, because he realizes that, sure, he knows what's real and the Matrix is fake, but do you really want to live in the Matrix, like in the real world with all the, the horrific, I mean, this is terrible. It's terrible what his life is like. So he decides, he'd rather live in a lie. And so he gets to go back. It's like,
Cypher
is reality a Naraka? Like, this is he's escaping the samsara, or he's entering back into it. But it's such a key, do you need to live in truth, or are you better off escaping it? It's the blue pill.
Why is it that like the Final Frontier gets such a bad rap? That is my favorite Star Trek movie. It's funny, but it's also it's just that.
Is that the one with the whale?
No, that's 4. And it's not at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but everyone always goes and asks. Probably not anymore. But anyway, that whole thing where he's like, it's the charlatan guru who's trying to tell everyone he's going to bring him to heaven. He's the cult leader guy.
Oh, right.
But the way that he gets them is the same way that Scientology does it, where he actually gets them to let go of their pain. And once they've let go of their pain, now they're vulnerable to ascribe that thing that happened for them to this person, that he did this for me, when really, like, this is just something that can happen for somebody, but he's like, but the best part is when William Shatner's like, but I need my pain. Who would I be without my pain? Our pain is what makes us who we are. And he's like, yeah. I need to sample it. It's just so good. But yeah, anyway, feels applicable to what you're talking about.
Yeah. He was still messed up about his son dying on Genesis, I think.
That's right.
Word.
Yeah, totally. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, so do you agree? I mean, do you think? What do you? Because I don't know, between the red pill and the blue pill, I find it interesting that before the Matrix, with the red pill, we start with a Star Trek about the blue pill, and why do you think that is? I mean, how important is that religiously? Because I mean, again, we're rebelling. I mean, Star Trek is made by Gene Roddenberry, who is kind of, I mean, he's pretty much a Satanist. Maybe he's not completely a member of the church, but we've seen the photos with him and Anton LaVey, and he's written about Anton LaVey as this number one advisor to his church, like you said, Kirk. So there's clearly kind of a satanic thing there, and it's not, I mean, it's not completely clear what Satanism is to him, but it seems closer to the Promethean thing. It's Anton LaVey's College 101 ethics course, but the idea that, you know, God is, you know, it's sort of God is in the hands of man's decision to make this prime directive, right? The prime directive is replacing God towards man ascending into Ubermensch, although it's limited because we're not supposed to be displacing, and we've already surpassed the Ubermensch in I mean, God, Star Trek is even more annoying than Warhammer 40k, but you have this whole thing where they genetically modify and have this eugenics war in the 21st century, and now we've realized that was a little too far, and we have to go back.
We're going a little carried away. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, they were still dealing with like the Third Reich echoes, not terribly far from. I mean, they were like, eugenics is a problem. This is a real zeitgeist issue. We didn't, just because we ended a regime doesn't mean the ethos was missing. You know, I'll say this and then I'll shut up because you were saying quite a bit that was probably more interesting than anything I'm about to say. But it seems that
just
culture,
for that, I'm freaking soloing you. Go ahead and talk for 10 minutes.
I'm not going to do that. But culture seems to be this thing where people are trying to find truth outside of themselves to ratify it with each other. Like, but the map isn't the territory, which is what we kind of understand. And then the blue pill analogy you're talking about essentially is like, what do you think Rome is, or any culture? It's like, look, life is hard. It's a struggle. But if you submit to these principles and these value sets and kind of play the game in these ways, you will benefit in such a way that it kind of negates maybe the raw harshness of the screaming nature of raw reality. Like, reality itself is gnarly. Like, if we didn't have language and we didn't have, you know, culture, so to speak, like hippies tend to think it would be like this perfect ecological like Eden or something. It's like, no, we fell out of Eden. We're no longer there. We're not animal, like, you know, unified consciousness in the animal kingdom like that. We know, we're self-aware. So I don't know. Don't give me 10 minutes to talk about it because I don't have anything else to say. But when you were like, the blue pill precedes the red pill, just like Saturn, you know, Saturnian elements of the Abrahamic religion, and then you get this Jupiterian kind of break free Jesus character. It's a pendulum, and it seems that the agreement, like the payoff for Cypher, you know, plugging back in or whatever, it's like if you play by certain rules, you'll get benefits, and those benefits can be a salve to the existential horror that is life. And it might not be true, but it's at least manageable more that way. So, I mean, and people's personalities tend to dictate what they gravitate towards. So if you're very legalistic and like want certainty and stuff, you're probably going to be more of a religious fundamentalist or whatever, you know, or a statist or whatever. And if you're, you know, more liberal minded and open and stuff, you're probably going to be a little more Burning Man or whatever the fuck.
Isn't that the justification of dogma as well? Like, dogma is like, you know, these are the rules, follow them. They don't make any sense up to you at the moment, but if you do follow them, then you'll be, you know, you'll become enlightened, a better person, whatever. I
heard a really good sermon by Tim Keller, R.I.P. Tim Keller. My grandparents started his church, so I know a lot about him. But anyway, he was a really good Christian theologian and pastor. I wouldn't ever say that about most believers. I don't really give a shit, but like, he's got some good shit to munch on if you ever want to get intellectual about Christianity at that level. In any event, he was kind of getting into the nature, the necessity essentially of the 10 Commandments being a social fabric weaver. It's like, if you don't have, you know, if everyone's like coveting and killing and stuff, you have Viking pirate villages where not a whole lot of momentum can really occur. It's very unsafe. Like, you know, it's like, it doesn't bode well for the cohesion of the culture itself. So these rules, whether, I don't know if they're metaphysical truths that, you know, in the sense of like, don't kill, don't steal, like, we could be like, is that God's law or whatever? But it's like, at least on this plane, it seems if you play by these rules, there's a better chance of survival and thriving. I mean, I think that's the gist of it.
Humor wasn't the same for them, and it's very strange. And like
humor,
like yeah, so like the Bereshit and Exodus, and those are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those are just loaded
rule books
with humor.
Okay.
So like, but it's not the same. So like I transcribed Genesis and a good portion of Exodus with my rabbi at one point, and that part with Sinai where he goes up the mountain, he receives something, we don't know what it is that he received. He walked, but it's very elaborate, the description of how hand of God came down and gave him whatever it was that
white
he gave
hair
him.
Radiation.
We don't know what it is.
Right.
He goes down the mountain. He sees everybody with the calf, meaning I just went through all this trouble. We were talking about the same kind of phenomenon earlier in other examples of it, where it's like that reaction to like, oh, you've learned nothing. Like I've just liberated you, and here you are doing what they did back in Egypt, or what you did. This is this whole other thing.
You're not 2.0ing it.
He's like, you're still slaves. I just
Right.
liberated you, and you're acting like slaves is the point of that. And so what does he do? He goes back up, and the way that it's written in the Hebrew, how the 10 commandments come into being isn't the same description as what happens before. So he writes the 10 commandments. Moses writes the 10 commandments. He comes back down. He has rules. Like he didn't have rules before. We don't know what it was that he had that was like, this came from God. And then it's like, this came from not just Moses, but a pissed off Moses. So he's like, you're obviously not ready for whatever it was that was. And also that Moses made that decision to smash whatever it was that he received from God.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Who the fuck is Moses? Yeah, but that's loaded with, that's a joke. But it's not like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Eyes Wide Shut. Like people don't realize like that those movies are like loaded with humor, but it's the same kind of biblical humor. And I've seen rabbis give speeches on this at the Jewish Museum in San Francisco when they're at a Kubrick exhibit. And rabbis have written on like I'm going tangential, but no, it's this idea that you can have a type of humor that's like a psychedelic kind of humor. That doesn't if you can treat it either way. Like you could take this completely seriously, but at a certain point you got to stop and be like, look at Hal saying, I think you ought to sit down calmly and take a stress pill and think things over. And like the ego of the thing not wanting to get shut, like that's hysterical. Like the whole thing is a riot. But like if you're in one space, you could laugh your ass off at it. If you're in another, you could just sit there totally serious and just be like, oh shit, he's shutting down the computer. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's written that way. It's very strange. But it's also like it's pointing out a profound truth about people and like our own tendencies. We could go through the most extreme circumstances to get ourselves out of a terrible situation and just be like, oh fuck, I just put everything into this. The water's parted. We did everything we could, and now we're here. And now what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing that we did before. And you'll find that's how addiction works. You can make the greatest strides and go through the most hellish stuff, and then you're back at the needle or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, that's just...
Well, in the Matrix, that's like there's been many iterations, and it's like this is the 7th version. It's like there's this repetition. It doesn't seem, even if we, I don't even know where. I'll just shut up. The point is, like enlightenment, whatever it is so personal that it's like it cannot be. It's like the Tao can't be spoken. And when you try to put it into language and try to put it into culture and stuff, it's a game of telephone and it gets so misinterpreted. And then people deify maybe the messenger or their personalities resonate with a certain level of it. And they go, heck yeah, this justifies certain proclivities I have. Very rarely, in a weird way, we have to, honestly, we tend to like look back on the past and be like, these idiots in a way, but it's like they were doing that was their tech. That was their internet. They were doing the best they could. They were hacking their reality the best they could. Given their circumstance. I mean, we have a lot of philosophy and, psychology, literature, science, all these things that we can kind of look back and think, they were archaic in a bad way. But it's like, how do you think the fucking, even 30 years from now, how, when there's Borg children running around just loading up quantum data only or whatever, they're going to be like, why were these people even using their mouths to speak? What the fuck were they doing? Or whatever.
Andreas, you gave us an AI explanation of Eyes Wide Shut being considered the best Christmas movie.
It challenges traditional notions of morality, family, and redemption. All themes are essential to the holiday. Rather than simply reaffirming the conventional, it deconstructs and transcends the Christmas narrative by confronting human desire, masks, and the secrets that lie beneath the surface of societal norms. I was going to ask you guys, though, why do you think Eyes Wide Shut is the best Christmas movie?
Well, that's easy because Eyes Wide Shut is literally my favorite movie in the first place. So why is it the best Christmas movie? Well, you know, there's no other Christmas movie that's my favorite movie in the first place. But but this was potentially going to star Steve Martin.
Oh my God.
When he first conceived it in the 1970s after he watched The Jerk, he bought every copy that he could possibly get of the novella Dream Story that it came from. You know, over time, it became a serious movie for him. But at the same time, it's not. It's this guy with his fragile ego, and him. The whole movie is this guy tripping out, him showing everyone his his ID everywhere he goes, and being like, "Look, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor." He thinks he's this level of status, and what he comes up against is that he's not high status at all. It's all relative, right? So in his world, he's saying it shows you kind of what keeps society running is people in this kind of existing within these frameworks. But the whole thing is a fucking riot. Like Alice having that, like, just laughing her ass off at him in his face, like in that, you know, in the initial scene, it sets him on one when she basically describes how she'd throw away the whole relationship and everything they had built for one night with this guy. But then when she has that dream later, also I highly recommend, if you can get the original script conception of her describing her dream to him when he walks in on her and she's laughing. It's like super trippy. It's like ultra biblical. He ends up crucified in it. Like, it's just like you can see it's indicated now still, like, oh, they can't find their clothes, you know, so you can see, oh, it's got an Eden parallel already in the movie, but like the original conception takes it even further. But yeah.
So when they're laughing at him when he's saying he's a doctor, is it like when David Icke says, you know, you're a divine spark having an experience of being a doctor?
Right. Totally. Yeah, exactly. It's deep. Yeah. It's super deep, but it's like he's identifying with the form instead of like what the form is emanating from, you know. So he's not a witness. He's in it. He's in the dream. That's why at the end when it's like no dream is ever just a dream, right? Because it's literally like trying to reflect back.
Did you ever read
on the literal level? And then
did you ever read
level?
Did you ever read Arthur Schnitzler's Traum novelle, like the dream novella it's based on?
Yeah, totally. And you can see a lot of the different components that are in the movie are shifted slightly to make it work. Like the prostitute's name is Domino because in the movie, because that's the name of the prostitute. That's a name for prostitute is Domino. So she's a domino, like, and then she becomes like her name is Domino. But yeah, it's funny. Like it's a funny story. Is it intended to be? Like, I can't even completely tell. Like, I don't know. It's like the Bible.
I mean, it looks like it was supposed to be originally funnier, and it is also on a level like it became super serious. But it was like originally he thought of it as pretty hysterical, and also that it was funny to remove the Jewish aspects. He said he wanted Tom Cruise's character to be like a Harrison Ford goy. That was the description, right? So I mean, like, to just remove. I mean, so there's something kind of funny about that alone, just to remove the Jewish aspects of Traum Novelle for the purpose of creating this goy in Central Park, you know, experiencing this world, right? Like, and it's kind of that's the idiot man who knows a little.
On Scientology too, because he happens to be casting like the two biggest Scientologists at the time in Hollywood in this movie, right at the same time when production started, where his daughter is essentially kidnapped by Scientologists because she's forced to cut off all ties with friends and family. Apparently, his only blood daughter.
Well, he was an oppressive person,
right?
When you go to church,
But you know, if she's an interesting follow on Twitter, by the way, Vivian Kubrick. Yeah, she's active again. She got put back on. She was removed a long time ago, but now she's back.
She was removed. I didn't.
It automatically became a commentary on Scientology because it had Tom Cruise in it.
Right.
Yeah. He probably played on that as well. I mean, it's probably pretty inevitable that Scientology is going to get into everything he's in, every appearance he's in on TV. It's going to have a, you know, a taint or
He's
whatever.
bringing that cologne in.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
I might regret that
less offensive word than taint, but you know, an odor or something.
I might regret that we didn't go deeper into Scientology, because I think that could relate to Gods and Man and Prometheus and Warhammer 40k.
Yeah, wasn't that Star Trek movie, the one where he's like being God and he started going to the center of the universe? Wasn't that like a joke on Scientology when he was like clearing everybody or something?
That's what I was talking about with the Final Frontier.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I need to rewatch it. Now I'm just thinking that. I'm sorry.
What's that guy, L. Hubbard?
It's an underrated Star Trek movie. I don't know why it's like that. I'm like, dude, this is the cool one, dude. Yeah.
All right, I'll rewatch it this week. Everybody with me, you're gonna have to watch Star Trek V: Final Frontier. It makes sense. You're gonna do it. You're gonna be happy. Okay, but we're at the 2-hour thing. Is there any you guys want to talk about one more thing or anything that's been on your mind for this week? I don't want to just end your.
I appreciate you guys. You guys are fucking fascinating monkeys. This is whatever, but the point I haven't watched any of the Synctank stuff, and the intro is cool. Just all of it. I'm glad this shit exists. I'm grateful that there's people playing around with ideas in such a way that isn't just gonna smash golden calves and crucify and all that shit. So it's just like, it's good. Like, there's trickster wisdom here that's deeper than not. And good God, you guys know so much culture. I mean, I thought I was a cultural fucking attaché or whatever. It's like, no.
That's why we like you around. You should be a little bit less demute. You don't need all that humility. It's worthless. But I appreciate the compliment that you like the show, but that reminds me of that scene, or that people like the show, or the audience likes the show. But it's like that scene in Tron Legacy where the simulacrum of Clue says, "Did you enjoy the worship ceremony? The audience found it quite riveting." And then Clue says it was not for them, But I appreciate it. I appreciate that other people enjoy what we're doing for ourselves as well.
Yeah, it's therapy, but it's like fucking Nosis therapy. It's crazy. It's good. Crazy in a non-diminutive way or whatever.
Yeah, in Germany, they say crazy a lot. It's funny. I'll be walking down the street and someone will just be like, "He's crazy." It's like, that's pretty fun to hear.
Yeah, crazy fun.
John, you got any thoughts you want to say, or anything you want to plug, or what's up? How you feeling?
No, nothing much.
If we ever go to war, I'll be on your side. I'll tell you that for sure. You're one of those people I would die with or for. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm not sure which flag I'll be marching under. Probably be a lot of black in it. But...
It's going to be an ex-church flag. You know it. Cromwell, Buford, Fitzgerald. But David Charles Plate, how about you? You wanna close with some thought?
I'd just like to say to Jim, we should do another podcast. That was really fun the last time we did it, that I was on your podcast. And I don't know how often you do that.
I haven't done it since last March.
Really?
Was the last guest. Yeah, Raphael, nice. But he's doing a lot with Andreas, so keep up with that. I don't know if Team Rabbit Hole will ever be a thing. We got to 300 episodes, 301, and the idea is fun, and it's whatever. But yeah, let's converse shit, even if it's on here. It's fun.
I demand a recount, and we're gonna do some more Team Rabbit Hole. I literally just tagged you today in a meme on X. I tagged at Team Rabbit Hole. Log into your Twitter.
I'm not on X.
Get it together, bro. You do. Yeah, I tagged you. So get it together, bro. And let's I love Team Rabbit Hole.
Anyway.
Dude, Team Rabbit Hole is a wonderful experience. If you guys haven't seen every episode of Team Rabbit Hole,
it's a time capsule.
But start with the ones with me in them, because I think I'm my favorite guest, right? So
use the search button and type in Andreas Xirtus.
Yeah, you guys are great. And to your point, I mean, I've been paying attention to Plate, and that's how I know about Andreas and all, because through sync book shit, right? And all those people. So it's just funny to see the baby of Nosis gestate in the womb as it does. It's just like, what the fuck?
I love seeing that. I love seeing people fighting over which is their favorite supporting Xirtus character, and David, they're fighting with you. I guess Terrorist and Jim. So what we're gonna do is get Terrorist, Jim, and David together, and then pit them at each other in an intellectual spar to see who survives. It'll be a TKO battle. That'll be fun.
Well, you guys are great. Have a good night.
I love you all very much. God bless. Cheers.